why fund managers can't beat the S&P 500? Because they're sheep. And sheep get slaughtered.
The numbers told the story, they always do.
Money never sleeps, pal.
Because all we care about is getting fucking rich.
You connect points I don't even know to look for.
The most valuable commodity I know of is information.
Public's out there throwing darts at a board sport. I don't throw darts at a board. I bet on sure things.
Welcome, Karma Clan. Week 7 is in the rear view mirror. We're approaching halfway through the season. Incredible. Definitely have gone through our peaks and valleys, not only across the sportfolios, but also in the league. As we suspected, COVID would be a major issue, and it keeps poking its head up on a week-by-week basis now. And it's likely to continue to get worse as we see kind of cases spiking across the US and across Europe, and as we head into the traditional flu season, late fall and winter. So I suspect we're going to continue to get thrown a lot of curveballs. Games are going to be missing. That means an emptier slate, a lot more question marks, more volatility, more uncertainty, variables that we certainly never need more of. But that is the situation that we're dealing with. So we're just going to do our best and continue to move forward. And we had a relatively decent week 7. So we come out of it in the core sportfolio sitting at 3-2-1. So positive in a tough week. We had very low conviction going into this week. But we're able to come out of it relatively unscathed. And in fact, we got some feedback from some of our premium Discord members about, and I'd mentioned this on a previous podcast, that like, hey, you guys used to be a lot more active in live trading games, offering us live bets, repositioning the portfolios, hedging positions that maybe went a little sideways. And, that was something that, we had a little bit of background distractions preventing us from being more active at the beginning of the season and into the week 6 and 7. But it's something we tried to be a little bit more active on the last 2 weeks and going to hope to be more moving forward. And I would say week 7 was one of our most active weeks. And we actually went undefeated across all live trades, adding an additional 7-8% to our aggressive portfolio. And in addition, we actually hedged our Browns -3 position in our core portfolio. We said in there, this game's going back and forth. This game is not playing out the way that we thought it was going to. We thought that the Browns would have a decisive victory. That's not happening. So if you can get Browns +3.5, we're going to hedge that. We're going to hedge that -3 with the Bengals +3.5 or better. And hey, if we middle it, great. If not, we get to come away with a push. So be it. We just wanted to eliminate exposure from that game. And as it happens to be, Browns win the game by 3, miss an extra point. So we're able to middle that. So pretty nice win there for the sportfolios. Not good for our contests, especially our Circa contests, which we were sitting at 9-1 in Q2, heading into week 3, sitting pretty competitive for that potential quarterly prize. And we had Browns -3.5. So that was a killer. But the rest of the picks, we had Bucks, Washington, nice winners there, pretty decisive. So that puts us with 3 wins, and then our final 2 losses, 2 completely uncompetitive games, total whiffs from a handicapping perspective, Texans +3, Patriots -3, ick. Corey, do you have any thoughts about especially Patriots. That was a game that we kind of uniformly agreed relatively that it was one of our kind of top 2, top 3 games. We thought it was a good bounce back spot for the Patriots. Cam coming off COVID, but back-to-back home games, Jimmy G coming back to face Bill Belichick, 49ers still dealing with injuries, Mostert was out. Seemed like all the variables lined up, but I guess maybe the one thing that we didn't take into too much consideration is that everything I just mentioned was not unique information. That was out there. That's what everybody was talking about. And again, that's just something that, yes, it's worthwhile information. It's something you need to weight accordingly. But the only way that there's edge in public information is if you think the public is misunderstanding the impact of that narrative and of those variables. And even then, you need to really ensure that they're really misweighting those variables for you to actually extract some edge. And so I think this was a very square handicap of ours. And it really showed throughout the course of the game. Patriots never competitive. Cam Newton looks miserable. Looks like he still has COVID right now. And dead arm looked like he didn't care. Looked like it was a bad coaching performance. Looked like the defense was slow. The offense was completely chaotic. What do you have to offer here, Corey?
Yeah, I think this Patriots offense is looking awfully one-dimensional at this point. If it's Cam Newton or Stidham at quarterback, neither one has looked that great passing the ball this year, and they really don't have much to throw to. I think N'Keal Harry's now injured, and then even when he was in, they weren't hitting the receivers. So I think it's made them very one-dimensional. And I think on top of that, this defense is nowhere near what it's been in the past either. I think losing a couple of those guys at the start of the season due to the COVID and everything, maybe they got through those first couple weeks off of Belichick and his coaching ability, because we saw that was a rather important early on, was just a continuity coaching culture kind of thing. But as the season's progressed, more teams are be able to catch up to that, I think, more so. So that coaching maybe isn't quite the edge as it was at the start of the season. So I think that's peeling back a little bit. And we see this New England defense that I think is close to the bottom 10 in the league. So they can't totally just rely on that and just play maybe just a very slow, efficient game on offense. They need to put up some points here and there. And I think they're really struggling to do that because they're just not very dynamic, I think. They need to rely on a run game that they can just kind of dominate. And they've been able to do that against teams like the Raiders, where we saw them just kind of take the lead and kind of control that game. Or even they played Seattle tough, or Miami. Like, those are teams where they can control the run game, and that opens up everything else. But when they aren't able to do that, it just makes them very just not able to really process everything that they're usually able to.
Right. And even more so, and building on top of that, is this is the type of team that if they get behind, then their entire game plan collapses. Because if you're down 2 scores, you can't put together an 8, 9, 10-minute drive of 3, 4, 8-yard runs, just sucking up clock. You're defeating yourself there. And then, your defense gets burned on the other side. So a team not built to come back from a deficit. And that's something that they've been facing the last 2 weeks. And we see that as soon as that game plan gets kind of flipped on its head, there is no alternative. And we're kind of seeing that play out. Took me a little bit by surprise, but one of the things that we talked about in the preseason podcast was that if things worked out right, and you got a kind of vintage Cam Newton, which we kind of saw in the first few weeks, that the Patriots are the type of team that could win this division, especially with Bill Belichick, and they still can. But the alternative scenario, which we talked about, and I talked about on Twitter, in which I got some pushback from, is that Cam Newton did not win the starting quarterback gig till the last week of training camp. And, even Zach pushes back like, that's, a charade. It's, he was always going to be the starting quarterback, and, case closed. And to me, that I'm not convinced of that. I wasn't convinced of that. And now I'm definitely not convinced of that the Patriots signed Cam to a 1-year contract. So it wasn't like they were diving in saying that, they had a ton of belief and conviction in the long-term suitability and talent and fit of Cam Newton in this offense. And so I think money and contracts speak volumes. And I think him being named as a starter in the last week of training camp also indicated that there wasn't as clear of a separation. And we kind of see the last 2 weeks. I mean, if, again, Cam gets off the run game and the game plan flips on its head, I mean, he's completely incompetent at leading an offense down the field through the air. So I guess we'll move on from the Patriots from there. But, I mean, is this the Patriots, Corey, in your view, what we've seen the last 2 weeks? Do we see a bounce back? Can they return to form of what we've seen the first few weeks? Because, I mean, just think about how quickly this narrative on the Patriots has now flipped. It was, and I was talking to Zach about this earlier, the first 2 weeks, oh my gosh, look at Bill Belichick, look at Cam Newton, look at the Patriots. They're going to be unstoppable on the ground. They're winning the division. They're going to be one of the best teams in the AFC. And look at Tom Brady down there in Tampa. Oh, man, he's got no Bill Belichick to rely on anymore. He doesn't even know it's the fourth quarter. That's a sinking ship. He's 42 going on 43. Like, this dude needs Bill, and Bill's off here riding into the sunset with Cam. And now that's exactly flipped on its face. And we can just see how fast these narratives change in this league. And do we really think the fundamentals have changed that dramatically in 2 weeks? I don't think so. I think it's just about perception and pricing. That is where the volatility is, not on the underlying fundamentals. So what's the true Patriots in your view, Corey? What we saw the first 2 weeks, and now they've kind of just dipped here the last few weeks trying to figure themselves out, fell behind, snowballed away from them, but they're going to regroup and bounce back, and we're going to see that strong team? Or is this kind of like a downhill from here?
Yeah, I honestly think it's kind of a mix of both. I think they're very matchup dependent. I think a lot like the Ravens, they're maybe a poor man's Ravens. If they can enforce their will with the run game, I think that's where games where they're going to be able to kind of take the lead. And I mean, if they're playing it from out front, I think that's very important for them. So we'll maybe see and be convinced we're seeing the Patriots of old. And then we'll see games where they're playing from behind and it just gets ugly. So I think there's a mix of both. I think this team is just very matchup dependent, and they're much like the Ravens. I mean, the Ravens just have, I think, significantly more talent than the Patriots at various positions. So, I mean, more times than not, the matchup is in their favor and they're able to kind of get ahead and play to their style. Whereas the Patriots aren't going to be so lucky with that, just from a skill standpoint, that they're not able to just totally dominate teams in that way. So I think with the Patriots, we won't see the consistency we see with maybe the Ravens in terms of wins and losses. Mm-hmm. So I think it's something that, I mean, we'll continue to see maybe a mix of both of what we've seen so far this season.
Yeah, that's actually a good analogy, thinking about the Patriots as basically a poor man's version of the Ravens. The Ravens are much more capable to actually get that lead and then sit on it and hold it. But they both do suffer from that same kind of downside vulnerability of, hey, you fall behind two scores and all of a sudden, they look defunct and totally disheveled and incapable of kind of resuming, that elite form that we're used to. So yeah, good analogy there. So let's move on. The Texans +3 was another game that was a bit of a whiff. I know, this was one where and this one I'm really disappointed in. And I know, Corey, you were one leg of us that, didn't really ever kind of come around strongly on the Texans. But at the beginning of the week, all three of us liked the Pack. like the Packers. In fact, we bet the Packers -3, I think on Monday last week, seeing that line, anticipating that it's going to move up, and that this was going to be a great spot for the Packers, great bounce back spot versus a defense that can't stop anybody, regardless if they have Deshaun Watson and capable of wide receivers. And we put that bet out into the premium Discord, finalizing that trade, getting ahead of the movement, locking it in. And then over the course of the week, we see this price pressure on the Texans, bringing the price lower and lower and lower. This thing actually hit 2.5 right before kickoff. So clearly some big money coming in on the Texans because the public was all over the Packers. And so as that kind of narrative crystallized, I feel like that scared us off because we clearly lost conviction. Because I know you didn't eventually flip on the Texans, but you definitely got off the Packers. I think the Packers weren't in any of our top 7 or 8 most favorite picks heading into this week, and so clearly this narrative completely dissuaded us. I feel like we tried to reverse engineer reasons on why we should substantiate that move in the market, rather than trusting our own fundamental handicaps on this game and saying, you know what, this price movement doesn't make sense to me. Clearly some big money believes in the Texans and they like to isolate the certain factors that, we talked about later in the week, Packers injuries, Texans still at home, getting a field goal, like from a high level standard numbers peer perspective, there's going to be bettors that just bet that blindly. But from a fundamental handicapping perspective, it still wasn't convincing. But nonetheless, this was one I feel like we got a little bit, we tried to get too cute, trying to trust purely the market movement, overweighting the market movement more so than everything else, trusting that the most. Because it was a very strong move, because pretty much every single public Joe Schmo, and even some professional handicappers leaned Packers, but this price just kept moving lower against all of that support. So, and it's very hard to go against big money. But again, sometimes we just need to trust our own fundamental handicaps. What are your thoughts on that allocation, Corey?
Yeah, so to start the week, I had strong conviction in the Packers at -3. And I think as the week wore on, kind of hearing about the Packers' injuries on the defensive side of the ball mostly, I think Friday's injury report brought out maybe 5-6 of the starters almost that were maybe either questionable or doubtful or out. So I think just with that, I think they actually had their left tackle out on offense as well as a running back. Well, I think all of that just kind of made me totally just not have strong conviction in what would happen in this game. I really didn't know how this defense would react, something I maybe necessarily hadn't seen before. So I just wasn't confident in just really knowing how this game would play out. I still slightly lean the Packers, I think, in the end, but it definitely, as you were saying, it totally fell off my board. And I think it was maybe the very bottom of it, just ever so slightly leaning Packers. But I think at a number like 3.5 on the Texans, it's like that's where it literally could flip. So there was no strong conviction for me at the point of kickoff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and too, that was probably the best position to take is, hey, I got this strong fundamental handicap. The market is moving against me with conviction and emphasis. I'm not going to fight that, but I'm also not just going to blindly jump onto it either. And so I think, just laying off was the best approach, and but we didn't do that. And, so that's something we want to make sure we continue to take into consideration and to how we weight, the different sort of signals that we incorporate into our handicapping and what ultimately drives our allocations. So moving on, Washington, this was a pick that we had pretty much across the board in our contest, in this portfolio, in the aggressive. This was a pretty easy winner. I think this one really came down to Kind of what we were talking about in the Texans game also played out in this Washington game, except that we actually aligned together. So the public was all over Dallas, riding Dallas, but the pressure kept moving against Dallas and into the favor of Washington. And then fundamentally, from our fundamental handicap, and I know Washington, was like one of my personally favorite picks of the week, just because of how putrid Dallas looked, not only on Monday, but, over the course of the season. Just continually like sloppy performances, poor coaching, poor decision-making. And now you've lost kind of one of your key enablers around, being able to really bring a team back from, 3 touchdowns down. And even with him, speaking of Dak, you still went down 2-3 scores every game. So clearly showing a pretty strong vulnerability there. And that's when they were at least somewhat healthy. And then Dallas is one of the teams that's getting wrecked by injuries the most on a week-by-week basis and in an isolated form. So isolated across the offensive line to the point where you're having third and second stringers as your starters versus one of the, I think arguably a top 5, certainly a top 10 front 7 in Washington. And 2, playing on the road. So whether you weigh that as at half a point, just for the travel component. And then having Andy Dalton back there, just not a potent, explosive quarterback who can't really leverage the wide receiver talent that he has around him. If you're going to give really anybody a miserable offensive line, no time to pass, no time for plays to develop, you put Patrick Mahomes back there, and he's not going to be the same type of quarterback. But even he is at least really explosive from a mobility perspective. But then you put back there a quarterback who is a traditional quarterback, and it's just dead meat. And as this just handicap played out perfectly, easy winner kind of from start to finish. And I think this was one that, we were pretty well aligned on over the course of the season. Any other takeaways from this game, Corey, on Dallas, Washington?
Yeah, I think just the defensive line versus the offensive line was the big thing here. And then I think additionally on that, what held me off at the start of the week, I'll be honest, and I had this game very low on my board, and it was just worrisome to me. Hey, we're taking Kyle Allen, we're taking Washington, and we're catching no points. And that's pretty rare for this Washington team. And it's kind of scary when you're with a quarterback like Kyle Allen, who's very turnover, fumble prone. So it's just not a spot that maybe feels comfortable most weeks. But the more I kind of thought about it and just kind of all the disruptions going on in the locker room for Dallas and how poor this team looked, they had turnover issues, problems themselves, and it was much worse than Washington so far this season. And it wasn't something, I don't think, just poor luck. So just looking at that, I think even that the turnover part of the aspect of the handicap even played in Washington's favor. So when you're taking Washington, a team that maybe struggles with turnovers with the quarterback like Kyle Allen, and then you're still favored maybe in the kind of the turnover battle, I think that just completely made me totally realize that Washington was the right side in this game.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I love actually paralleling this Washington-Dallas game to the Texans-Green Bay game, specifically this week, because there are so many kind of the same variables at play, just moving in different directions. But so in this Washington-Dallas game, as I mentioned, the public pounding Dallas. So in one of the sources that we like to look at to kind of give us a sentiment driver, we saw 10x support in Dallas's favor. And to your point, Corey, yeah, maybe Washington catching no points at 0 is not super attractive, but would you say that it's so egregious that you should have 10x support in Dallas's favor? Like, no, by no means. It's not that bad. Whereas when we saw the Texans and we saw not the same extreme, but it was like 7x, 8x support for the Packers over the support for the Texans, you could understand like why that could be the case, because the Packers have an explosive offense. The Texans defense has been getting destroyed week after week after week. And the Packers have one of the most explosive offenses. And besides missing Aaron Jones and their left tackle, they were, still had Devontae Adams back, still have Aaron Rodgers, still have the rest of the offensive line. And we know running backs are still relatively interchangeable. So it's not something that we really like. Missing Aaron Jones is not really that big of a deal. So the difference between there is you could understand why the public would be just levering up on the Packers. So maybe you don't overweight that kind of imbalance too much because it makes sense. The imbalance in Washington Dallas made no sense. That was pure like, oh, it's the Cowboys versus Washington, like name brand in itself. And that imbalance is not substantiated. And I think that's where you could like isolate some edge in which we were successful and able to do. Lastly, Buccaneers -3.5 was our last pick. This was another easy winner in the end. I think probably this is a game I want to go back and rewatch. From some of the commentary I heard that it wasn't as definitive as maybe the final score implied. This was a one I'll give you and Zach tons of credit. You guys were pounding the tables on Bucks pretty much from the start of the week. I know it was kind of your guys' two favorite picks, and neither one of you really kind of ever leaned off of it. It was definitely Bucks all the way. It was just once it was wobbling between 3.5, 4.5, and there was obviously this COVID headlines around the Raiders offensive line, and were they all going to miss the game, or were most of them going to continue to play the game? And a lot of questions around that. But this was one, like, if it was above 4, especially at 4.5, I didn't love it. I think I had it as like maybe my 5th or 6th favorite game, I think, when we were going through what games we liked. So I see I had it here as my fifth favorite game. So still in my top 5, but nowhere near to the same conviction that you guys had. But the game definitely came through in the end, was a relatively easy winner. Bucks get the win on the road versus the Raiders by 20 plus points. Any key takeaways from this one, Corey?
I think in that game, it was just kind of Bucks or nothing for me. From the very start with that offensive line having issues and knowing how good Tampa Bay's defense has been this year, I think just from a matchup standpoint, I just didn't see how Oakland's offense would keep pace with Tampa's offense in this game, just with how bad Oakland's defense additionally has been. Oakland's defense has struggled to keep teams under 30 points, and Tampa's offense isn't a shabby offense at all. So I figured they would get their 30, and I just didn't see how Oakland would find many points. So, Oakland came out right where I thought they probably would with the 20 points. Now, I didn't expect Tampa Bay to drop 45, but they were well clear of the cover and in control of this game.
Do you upgrade the Bucks after this game?
I don't a whole lot, maybe a little bit, but probably not much at all, because it's just something I think from a matchup standpoint, they matched up really well with the Raiders. And I think the Raiders just had a lot of fundamental things kind of not go their way through the week with practice, and just they were missing their best player on defense, key lineman on offense. They didn't get a practice with their offensive line, and that was a big piece to this matchup, just with how good Tampa Bay's defensive line is. And I think just with all that being said, I can't see a big upgrade here.
Mm-hmm. What would you say? I still have to go through my power rankings for the week, but what was your biggest upgrade of the week? What was your biggest downgrade of the week?
Let me take a look here 1 second. I would say my biggest downgrade on the week, I believe, was probably the Patriots off a quick glance, or Dallas. Dallas was definitely my greatest downgrade, just with the quarterback change now, most likely for this week. And just they have shown no life again. So them and the Patriots, I know, are 2 significant downgrades I had. Outside of those, I don't think I had too large of downgrades this week. In terms of upgrades, I think – let me look. The Steelers, not a huge upgrade, but a little bit of an upgrade. In the end, they didn't end up looking too great, I think, down the stretch. The Rams, I'm starting to believe in the Rams a little bit more, I guess. I'm kind of wanted to kind of tail kind of conviction in how good they would be this year. And I still kind of want to believe it, but I think the more I don't want to be too stubborn with it. And I think they've kind of shown time and time again, though against not some of the best talent in the league, but they're a team that's pretty consistent, I think. And they're a team that's well coached. So I think this is a team that will consistently put in decent to above average performances more times than not. So I think the Rams maybe got one of my bigger upgrades on the week.
Mm-hmm. I think I probably agree with those same. I'm probably going to downgrade the Patriots the most this week. And outside that, I don't, most teams performed in line with expectations, so I'm not going to be upgrading or downgrading them. Panthers played the Saints tough. I'm not upgrading the Panthers because I already had the Panthers pretty high. I'm not downgrading the Saints because I had them relatively low compared to maybe the broader market has them. I'm not downgrading the Browns off a relatively questionable performance versus the Bengals because I didn't have them ranked too high. And I'm not downgrading the Bengals since I actually thought they played a pretty good game. Or I'm not upgrading them either because I already had them somewhat higher than the market already had them. In fact, so I'll say like my biggest upgrade this week, maybe surprising, is probably going to be the Titans. I think, in fact, even in the loss, I think this was a game I really liked the fight that I saw from the Titans coming back down from multiple scores. The Titans was one of those live trades that we made in aggressive, betting them plus 15.5. Easy cover in the end as they only lose by 3. So that was a nice cash for aggressive. But I really liked what I saw from the Titans. I think this was a good defense that they played. This was, one of the tougher matchups that they played, and they played really competitively. So I think this was a game that I feel like vindicated the Titans kind of in my eyes, in the sense of, before this game, there were some question marks around how good the Titans maybe really were. And I'm sure some people are still thinking that. But I just think this game, at least in my eyes, I'm upgrading the Titans considerably off this home loss. And that's just because I think they proved a lot here. And I think they're going to be a relatively bet-on team moving forward. So
quickly. I think that makes some sense for you to have a higher upgrade on the Titans. Just taking a look at here, myself, Brett, and a couple other handicappers. Brett had them actually the lowest going into this week. So I think with that, he'll maybe, kind of coming back to where maybe closer to where we are maybe with the Titans. I had a slight upgrade to them this week, but not too large. But I think it's something where that makes some sense then.
Yeah. And I think also, we talked a lot about the Patriots and their struggles. But, the Bills have also not been playing very well the last couple of weeks, barely squeaked out a win versus the Jets this week. The Jets was a game that we came so close to allocating to in the end. Would have looked super, super sharp to bet the Jets after an 0-6 start ATS, and then get them for that nice first ATS victory. And they played relatively competitively. We thought a lot of variables finally lined up for them to be bet on this game for the first time pretty much all season. Ultimately, we did not allocate to them in this portfolio or across any contest because we are wusses. And we definitely did not want to lose by betting the Jets when we kind of been pounding the table over the course of the season that this team is not bet on, and that you really need to see that definitive competitive performance from them before you can really even give them any kind of consideration or thought. And we saw that this week. And we saw a little bit of that a couple weeks ago versus Denver, actually. Let that one get away, and the score was not really reflective of how close that one was. And that was one of the reasons why we actually talked about and actually did come very close to actually betting the Jets this week, but we ultimately did not. So, but yeah, with the Bills, I mean, the NFC East or the AFC East, if the Dolphins weren't benching Fitzmagic and weren't trying to trade Xavier Howard and sounds like they're still not necessarily trying to win that division, which at 3-3 and with so many questions around the Bills and Patriots, I think they're as in it as anybody is, but they seemingly don't want it. If they did want it, I think they could be the best team in the AFC East. What do you think, Corey?
Yeah, I think they have the potential. I've been someone that's been high on the Dolphins this whole season. I think they've been a bet on team and they've shown it in the market. I think they're maybe 5-1 against the spread, 4-2, something like that. 4-2 sounds right. But yeah, I think this Dolphins team, I've just been pounding the table about free agency moves in the offseason. Additionally, just a lot of new faces. It's going to take some time for this team to gel. And it's a team where I thought that they had the talent. It's just a matter of you're going against two kind of blue bloods in the Bills and the Patriots, two teams that have been there before, well coached. So it would take some kind of something new from the Dolphins, I think, to kind of uproot one of those teams. So I'm definitely on the Dolphins, and I still think I don't like the change to Tua necessarily from a standpoint of winning games, but I know that's maybe not the case what they're trying to do here. But I think with all that being said, I think the Dolphins still will maybe provide some decent value. I still don't think they're a bottom 5, maybe even 10 team in the league.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, collectively, we've been high on the Dolphins. I mean, we bet the Dolphins 3 times already this year. We bet them versus the Bills. That was a nice win and cover. We bet them versus the Niners. And actually, we sold a point. We had so much conviction there, and they win outright by 4 touchdowns. And then we bet them against the Seahawks as well, in which they played really competitively in that game, ultimately didn't cover, but definitely should have, kicked 6 field goals inside the red zone 6 times, and just couldn't cash. If they could have led at least 1 touchdown or not let the Seahawks get a touchdown drive on the last 19 seconds of the first half, that's another easy cash there. So we've definitely been high on the Dolphins. I think where we have some internal disagreement here is around the introduction of Tua. And, so I downgraded the Dolphins meaningfully. So I think I downgraded them like 2+ points. And it might be worth more so. I think you're going to get select spots where Tua is going to look well. I've thought of Tua as having a ceiling of Marcus Mariota. Marcus Mariota had good games. I mean, he was a starter in the league for a couple of years. He led the Titans to the playoffs one year. There was definitely long periods where people thought Marcus Mariota was going to be a good NFL quarterback. But, it eventually became clear that was not the case. But that doesn't mean that he can't have pockets of good games. I think you're going to see pockets of good games from Tua. I'm not nearly as down as him as I was Haskins, in which that played out perfectly is kind of how I envisioned it happening. And that I was talking about in the preseason podcast, I was talking about in last year's podcast. I mean, again, by no means do I have that same conviction with Tua. It's just, I did not see an NFL quarterback while watching him in Alabama. And when he played the toughest defenses, he looked like shit. In fact, I mean, getting benched, especially in the championship game versus Clemson. I think the broader narrative on Tua is based on some of his very early games that he played at Bama that were extremely high profile, and he kind of been riding that ever since. Again, he's mobile, also injury prone, has hip issues, not the tallest. I think he's a very emotional quarterback as well. You can get into his head. So that's kind of my thoughts on Tua. I don't want to get in too much of a rant there. So I know we've talked a lot about week 7. So we're going to go quickly through week 8, but hopefully you're to get some kind of key takeaways around our thinkings, some of our positions, how we're going to improve some of our thinking moving forward. So let's dive into week 8. Corey, do you want me to read the lines to you, or do you want to kick off?
I can kick off reading the line.
Sure.
We'll start on the Thursday night game. We got the Atlanta Falcons at the Carolina Panthers. Carolina Panthers -2.5, shaded towards -3.
Yeah, I think I saw this around 3 for the most part. So it looks like some pressure coming in on the Falcons. Being a Thursday game, these are two teams that I feel like I have the Panthers definitely rated higher, but that seems to be, priced well here. I think this is a fair line. It's a Thursday game, so, maybe we'll recreationally bet it, not going to put it into a portfolio or have it into any of our contests. So probably won't think about it too substantively. What about you, Corey?
Yeah, I lean to the Panthers in this spot. I think where the Panthers struggle is their rushing defense on the defensive side of the ball, but Atlanta won't be able to exploit that. They have the third worst rushing offense in the league. And then I think on the other side of the ball, I think where Carolina's passing or where offense excels is passing, and they're top 10 in the league in that. And that's where Atlanta's pass D has really struggled. And I know they've been beat up and injured for some games this season. So some of that's probably playing into this, but they're second worst in the league versus the pass. So I think from a matchup standpoint, I think Carolina will be able to find their offense. And I just don't think this Atlanta offense, though I think the potential is there, has really started to click yet. So I want to try to back maybe the Panthers and kind of rely on necessarily that we're going to see it this game. We're going to see it this game. Because I think this is a game where the Panthers will find their points. And I just have more faith in that than I do in Atlanta finding theirs.
Yeah, I mean, the Panthers defense, man, assumed by some to be one of the worst in the league by a wide margin. And they're putting together some really tough games. Kept we're obviously competitive with the Saints all game and had the lead there for a while. Played competitively versus the Bears as well. Played competitively versus the Bucks even and near the end there and should have covered actually. So this is not a defense that's getting blown out of the water like the market assumed heading in to the season. So really impressive effort there. Definitely a lot of props to the coaching. And if I was probably going to lean in either direction, I agree with you, Corey, that especially under the field goal, probably lean to the Panthers. Better coaching. I think better quarterback, definitely moving in the right direction. And lastly, the last thing I'll talk about the Panthers, and I'll probably mention this again on future podcasts, is just talked about how much I love the Panthers organization and the direction that they're going in. I'll have to post this on Twitter and in the Discord, but I wrote an article at the end of last year when Coach Rivera was fired, about how bullish I was on the Panthers organization, specifically due to their owner, David Tepper, who's one of the most elite hedge fund managers in the game, who has absolutely, no regard for making sentimental or emotional decisions, and is a pure numbers, data driven guy, and is going to make, plus EV decisions time and time again. And I'm really excited to see how he continues to actively manage this organization. And I think, we're already seeing some of that play out this year when the Panthers already have as many victories as people thought that they would have over the course of the entire year. We're not even halfway through the season. So really bullish on the Panthers from a long-term perspective for sure. And I think, this is a team that you're going to see deep into the playoffs, if not the Super Bowl, in the next, 2 to 4 years, unquestionably. So, all right, let's move on. Next game.
Indianapolis Colts at the Detroit Lions. Indianapolis Colts -2.5.
Colts coming off a bye. I would probably, the Colts is not a team that has been super consistent. Lions stringing together a couple wins here, but we talked so much about week 7. We weren't able to talk about every single game, but there were some really crazy endings over the course of the week, and the Lions Falcons was definitely one of those games. Falcons definitely should have won that game. Maybe shouldn't have covered. I think so. The Lions was definitely the right side from a spread perspective, but Lions fortunate to come out of that game with a winner. So is the market upgrading them too much? Maybe not. They're at home, almost catching a field goal versus the Colts, and they haven't proven too much. Which line? Where are you leaning, Corey?
Yeah, I think I slightly lean with Detroit here. I definitely would want the 3 if I took it, just for the backdoor possibility. But I look at the Lions Lions and that just kind of poor rush defense that they have. It's very similar to Cincinnati. And I think on the offensive side of the ball, how Detroit likes to throw the ball and that's how they exploit teams is also maybe kind of similar to Cincinnati in terms of how they've kind of been able to move the ball. So I think maybe I kind of make a comparison in that Cincinnati-Indianapolis game, how Cincy was able to move it, even though the second half they weren't able to do much. So that's kind of where I'm torn on this game. And I also realized Detroit likes to take a lot more shots downfield, where Cincinnati, it's a lot more playing underneath. But I think I would lean with Detroit here. And I think this is maybe some of just my macro view on Detroit, believing that this team is very talented. And I think we've seen from the Colts, Philip Rivers hasn't looked the best in the last couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. And if Detroit can play from out front, which they have shown to be able to this season, and jump out to a 14-0 lead, I don't like this game if the Colts are maybe throwing it a ton, which they would be forced to do in that situation. It did work for them versus Cincinnati, but I'm just not so sure it will work necessarily. I think Detroit's definitely not a ton better, but definitely a better team than the Bengals are.
Yeah, I think Lions plus 2.5 reduced juice right now, so maybe leaning towards 3. I totally agree. If you get Lions plus 3, I think that's probably a contest play. I think it's a very competitive potential sportfolio play.
Next game, we got the Minnesota Vikings at the Green Bay Packers. Packers by 6.5.
Vikings also coming off a bye. I would definitely like to look into see. I know you like to look into these types of stats like Zimmer off a bye, like what his ATS spread looks like. This seems like not a bad spot for the Vikings, especially catching all the points. I mean, again, the Vikings are another team where the market has just been so wishy-washy on them. It's like if the Vikings look bad, they get punished. If they look good, then all of a sudden the market loves them. And the market doesn't like the Vikings right now. 2 weeks ago, they loved the Vikings. And so now they're catching 7 in a division game. Vikings defense looks like it was getting better. They traded, away Yannick Ngakoue. I don't know what was necessarily behind that, since they traded for him earlier in the season. So I don't know what kind of consternations may be going on behind the scenes, or if they're giving up on the season and they're kind of just going to start rebuilding. I know they're having still some injury concerns in their secondary. I don't know if you want to get in front of this Packers train at home. Packers have shown that they're capable of covering any number. So the 7 in itself is certainly, catching 7 is not going to be a safety net by betting the Vikings. You're going to have to believe that the Vikings can win this game, I think, for you to take 7. What do you think, Corey?
Yeah, I think in this game, I lean towards the Packers ever so slightly at that 6.5. I'd feel a lot more comfortable with a teaser maybe on them. I do think they come away with the win here. I think where I see it maybe something that doesn't play in the Vikings' favor is their offensive line ranks 20, just kind of pass blocking, whereas Green Bay's defensive line ranks 8th versus the pass. And Kirk Cousins, as we know, is not a good quarterback under pressure. So if Green Bay can pressure him, it just won't bode well for the Vikings. And then I think additionally, just for the passing game of the Vikings, Jair Alexander has a lot of corner success this season. I think he's actually the number 1 rated corner at this point, though he has struggled with Thielen in the past. So I'm not totally sold that he's going to shut him down, because he hasn't been able to in previous matchups. But it really will come down to maybe if the Vikings fall behind early, I think this could be a really long game and the Packers blow them out. So this could be a game you maybe look at to live bet angle, because the Vikings are going to really want to run the ball in this. The number 3 rushing offense, and the Packers struggle versus the run. So I think that's where maybe the Vikings will try to kind of lean on early on. But if they have to play from behind, it might not look too pretty.
Mm-hmm. Definitely agree. I think, again, Packers' weaknesses are you need to get pressure on Rodgers, and you need to have a very strong run game to really be able to milk the clock, take the ball out of Rodgers' hands, and really run up the middle of that defense. And, that's something we saw definitely last year. The Niners were certainly able to do that, and the Chargers were able to do that, and the Bucs were able to do that this year. So are the Vikings to be able to do that? I don't know how they're going to get pressure on Rodgers. And that really seems to be like the number 1 factor, is if you can't get pressure on Rodgers, it doesn't matter who his receivers are. It doesn't even matter even if he has a backup lineman in there, is if you still can't get pressure on Rodgers, he's going to find somebody over the course of, that 4 to 5 seconds that you're giving him. And if you have Devontae Adams, who he has great chemistry with, that looks to be sufficient. I probably would not bet Packers here just because, at least at this stage in the week, I'm just looking at this as, a line approaching 7, probably going to get to 7 by the time, as a contest player or anything like that. Division game versus capable Vikings. The Vikings have put in performances where they've looked good. And they have looked better as the season's gone on. Put in a dud versus the Falcons. But, not a great spot, I feel like. So next.
Yeah. The last thing I'll add to that is the Vikings did trade Yannick Ngakoue this last week, and I think that's just maybe a sell sign for the Vikings. Not that they necessarily still had. I mean, at a record of 1-5, you can kind of generally assume that the team's maybe not going to be making the playoffs or making a push for it. But I think just making that trade, and then additionally, I think Danielle Hunter. I mean, he's out for the season and he wants a big contract. I think that defensive line's going to struggle. So I do wonder if they'll be able to get pressure on Rodgers in this game.
Mm-hmm.
Taking a look at the next game, we got the New England Patriots at the Buffalo Bills. Bills by 3.5.
3.5, I don't like the Bills. At 3, I probably do like the Bills. It's hard to try to buy the bottom on the Patriots when they have not shown really any signs of life over the last 2 weeks. Now, hey, maybe they do show it here because the Bills haven't looked good either. So you're trying to guess who's going to come around in this game. Unless we can find no opportunities elsewhere, this is probably a game I want to pass, see how it plays out, see if you see any signs of resurgence from either one of these offenses or defenses. It's hard to not take the Patriots plus a field goal in a division game, but a field goal has not even been close to enough the last 2 weeks. Now, those have been outside of the division, so there's that. So I feel like if this is 3.5, I feel like you've got to probably lean the Patriots and just hope Cam shows up and that they're able to get a good run game together and that the Bills can't take a significant lead. We've seen that the Bills, even when they get a lead, aren't really capable of hanging on to it. And I think the Bills have shown a sufficient amount of weakness the last few weeks that the Patriots may be able to play competitively. You think that a Bill Belichick coach team is not going to put in 3 just absolute duds in a row, especially now coming up versus a division opponent. Is going to be a huge game relative to deciding the division. So in a game like that, you feel like, again, Bill Belichick team, I don't care who the personnel is, that they're going to play competitively. And at 3.5, that does look attractive. But again, you definitely have to hold your nose. And I'm not going to be running to bet that.
Yeah, I don't have a strong lead on this game either. I look at it, and we're looking at two actually bottom 10 pretty much defenses. And I think that's just a big surprise and maybe something that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge yet, just with the Patriots and Bills. Those are 2 defenses that a lot of people, I mean, they were top 5, top 10 defenses last year, and a lot of people had them as top 5, top 10 defenses this year. So they're both really underperforming. I do look at the Bills rushing defense, and that's where they're very poor on defense this season so far. They struggled versus the Titans, I know, just a couple of weeks ago, the Chiefs. And so this is a game where, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast, if the Patriots can play from ahead or in a competitive standpoint, they're probably going to be fine. So I think if the Patriots can kind of get back this run game, I think this is a matchup where they can move the ball versus the Bills and remain competitive and not have to play from behind. I look on the other side of the ball and I see the Patriots pass D is kind of where they've struggled this year. And that's actually where the Bills have really moved the ball. I think Josh Allen and those receivers, he's clicked with Diggs a lot this season. And so I think that both teams will maybe find some offensive success in this game. So I think right now, maybe looking at that total at 43.5, I'd maybe light lean to the over. Though it just doesn't feel right. But I think a lot of that is just name recognition with the Patriots and Bills that kind of makes you shy away from that number.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like every single thing you just talked about sounds like it's a slam dunk over. I mean, I'm seeing 42.5 on Bookmaker, and That's the lowest total on the board for the week. And you're talking about two of the worst defenses with capable offenses. I mean, we've seen the offenses play capable this season. Obviously, they're both in a rut right now. My concern, at least I guess more so on the Patriots side too, is, lost him to N'Keal Harry. I mean, it's just so disappointing to see the Patriots not go after somebody. I mean, I know they went after Mohamed Sanu last year. What a miserable trade that was. Why aren't the Patriots more active in trying to get somebody somewhere to help Cam Newton from a personnel perspective, or any quarterback that the Patriots want to march out onto the field there, to help from the wide receiver perspective? I don't know what this team is doing, what Bill Belichick is doing. It's just really sad to see. But yeah, so next
game, we got the Tennessee Titans at the Cincinnati Bengals. Titans by 6.
So Bengals, I think we've talked about it, capable of putting in, a bad performance if you're able to get pressure on Burrow like the Ravens were. But even in that Ravens game, and we talked about this in the X-ray report, when we try to break down these games, isolate what we've seen that maybe might not be captured in the mainstream headlines to help you handicap these games, bet teams moving forward. And one of the things we talked about in that Ravens-Bengals game, Bengals got blown out. Your key takeaway from that score might be, wow, Bengals suck, Ravens are good. Joe Burrow sucks. His previous past games, you're not going to see that again. That was a misnomer, something that's not going to be repeated. And the thing is in that Ravens game, when the Ravens couldn't get pressure, Burrow was effective, was getting the ball down the field 10, 15 yards rather effortlessly. You put pressure on him, he's dead, done, dead meat. So this is really just going to come down to, can the Titans get pressure on Burrow? And it really is that simple. If they can, because the Bengals have a miserable offensive line, if the Titans can get pressure, I think the Titans are more than capable of covering this number, even on the road, because the Titans should be able to run on the Bengals. I think it is a nice, somewhat of a nice bounce back spot off that tough Steelers loss. I'm not in love with the number. I wish it was a little bit lower, but it is really going to come down to pressure on Burrow. So if you think there's an edge here that you think that is going to play into fruition, then I think it's Titans -6 all day. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think when I look at this number, it reminds me of a game last week when I looked at it, and I lean towards the Bears +6 versus the Rams. It just seems high. So I think naturally I just kind of want to lean towards the Bengals. But then the more I look at it, it does seem the matchup side of this kind of game, it just really kind of screams Titans. So I think if the Titans, I think the big thing is the pressure. If they can pressure Burrow, I think it's home run Titans, even at the 6. But I'm not sure the Titans are a team that's been getting a lot of pressure this year. But I do think the Titans see a lot of offensive success. So it's, will Cincinnati be able to match that? And I think to your point, that really just comes down to the pressure rate.
Yeah, and that really is what's going to come down to. So that's something we're going to have to drill down into over the course of the week, see if there is any edge there to be had. Because the Bengals, if you don't, then the Bengals will play you competitively, and they will be able to cover the 6 like they have over the course of the whole season, pretty much. Especially in the Browns games that they played, in the Colts game, in earlier games in the versus Chargers and several others earlier this season, especially at home, because the team has the offensive firepower to keep up with you. And the Titans defense is certainly nothing to be, pumped up betting -6 on the road versus a capable offense. So from that perspective, it doesn't look attractive, but I think it really just does come down to that one factor. Can you get pressure on Burrow? If you can't, it's Bengals. If you can, it's Titans.
Right. I agree with that. We'll take a look at the next game. We got the Las Vegas Raiders at the Cleveland Browns. Browns by 2.5, shaded towards 3.
This is a tough one. I think the Raiders are going to be able to score, and the Browns could not stop Bengals at all. It really just going to come down to whoever's going to have the ball last, and the Browns did have the ball last. And the Raiders offense continues to be able to move the ball. They got some offensive line issues now. There's some COVID issues. But, if this moves to 3, I think I like the Raiders. Especially no OBJ. I understand OBJ went out and Mayfield was able to still, play good football, but I think that will catch up with that team eventually, and could be even in this game. Now, the Raiders defense is certainly not anything to be pumped up about either. But at +3, if this is a game that's just going to be maybe possibly back and forth, I actually probably trust the Raiders offense more so than I do the Browns. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I think I lean towards the Raiders here as well. We look at 2 pretty poor defenses and 2 pretty, sufficient offenses. So I think points will be had in this game. I think both their strengths, Cleveland's rushing offense, that's Las Vegas's weakness, is their passing or rushing defense. And then on the other side of the ball, Vegas's passing offense is their strong suit, and that's where Cleveland really struggles. So I think both teams will be able to get their own points in this. So I'm going to be looking towards the over here. Early money I've seen come in on the under, so I'm waiting to bet it at this point just to see maybe how far it goes. I also want to try to maybe determine what entirely is pushing that down. But I think from that standpoint, I lean Raiders in this game. I think this is a game that could go either way. It'll be a shootout, so I'd lean Raiders.
Yeah, I think this is a really nice teaser leg, especially teasing this over, especially if there is some pressure on the under, which I think there's going to be pressure on the under pretty much across the board as some of these scores start to get off some of like the explosive numbers that we saw earlier on in the season. Numbers, maybe the prices got adjusted a little bit too high, too fast. Now coming back a little bit down to earth, better trying to capitalize on some of that mispricing. So I think that, there's going to be some pressure more so on some of these unders. And so if this moves down to 52, tease this down to 46, find something else to kind of pair that with, I think that could be a good option.
Right. Next game, we're looking at the New York Jets at the Kansas City Chiefs. Chiefs by 19.
Yeah, this one's super tough to handicap, I think. It's really just going to come down to, do the Chiefs want to win by more than 19? I don't know. We've seen definitely performances before where they're not trying to do that. I don't think they were trying to do that versus the Broncos, and it just kind of happened to be the case. And that could definitely happen in the Jets. Like the Chiefs could be trying to not win by more than 2 touchdowns, and they still win by 30 because the Jets are just so incompetent and make mistakes, and the Chiefs are able to capitalize on them. That being said, there's got to be other opportunities to find this week. I know I've talked about, again, you can't bet the Jets, but with Darnold, their wide receivers are getting healthier, especially if Jamison Crowder does come back. Denzel Mims it showed his face for the first time all season. And again, the Chiefs have already demonstrated that they're just going to try and run the ball in some of these games, try to get out with a victory, try to get out healthy, try to shorten the game. When that's the case, they try to run the ball. They're not trying to blow the top off and win this game by 40. I don't think they're going to try to win this game by 19 or more. I don't think they're going to try to do that. I think they're just going to try and shorten the game, get out with the W. It's just, are the Jets going to play so miserable that, there's Darnold's pick sixes or fumbles on his own 20-yard line, and it gives the Chiefs short fields, and it's just, one effortless Mahomes pass across the middle to Kelsey for a touchdown. These are the types of plays that I think is how this score can get away from you. But I think there's got to be other opportunities to bet besides this game.
Right. I don't think there's a strong opportunity here. We're looking at the best offense and the worst offense in the league, so that's kind of interesting. I think one thing that sticks out to me is Adam Gase, not the best when he's on the road and a significant underdog. So anytime that he's an underdog of 5 or more points on the road, he is actually 4-17 against the spread. So that's pretty significant. And I think more than just the trend, I mean, I think it says something just about maybe how he prepares the team in situations like this. So I've heard before from players in camp and that they just don't prepare to win games, and it's just not similar to other teams. So I think that a lot can be said here, maybe in that trend. And I don't think it's just maybe random luck. So I think with that, it's hard to really come to a strong consensus in this game, especially because we just don't know how the Chiefs, the motivation factor, if they want to blow them out or not.
And I think too, probably the under on this, I think could look attractive. I think the Chiefs' main priority in this is just going to be to shorten the game, not try to put up necessarily a bunch of points. So if that is the case, maybe this is the other nice leg that you could tease up, and tease this under, 55. I think that looks attractive.
Right. Next game we'll take a look at is the Los Angeles Rams at the Miami Dolphins. Rams by 4.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think we talked about this maybe a week ago when Rams was -3. And that definitely does look more attractive. I think I still like Rams -4. Tua's first game, I don't love betting against Tua in his first game, because you can get those kind of fireworks the first game, a lot of adrenaline. The team is pumped, to play with him, and you get some just randomness. There's not a lot of tape on Tua. Rams coming off a short week, big win over the Bears, now going across the country. So it's not a great setup from the Rams perspective. Miami coming off a bye. Tua also left-handed, so that could throw in some wrinkles from the Rams defensive strategy perspective. I think he's the only left-handed quarterback starting in the NFL right now. So there's a lot of wrinkles there. So I feel like I'd probably still lean the Rams, but I might be kept off of it for all those reasons I just discussed.
Yeah, I'm definitely leaning towards the Rams here. I think the one thing that really stands out to me is the Rams have the number 1 rushing offense this year, and the Dolphins are dead last in rushing defense. So I think the Rams will definitely be able to run the ball, and in that, really open up their play action for Goff, because as we watch the Rams, they love to do a lot of play action, and Goff is a quarterback that plays a lot better when he's not pressured versus when he is pressured. It's night and day different, and I just don't think, because of how much success the Rams will see running the ball in this game, that he'll just be able to, he'll have all day, he'll have time just off the play action, because they're going to have to start really loading the box to try to slow down this Rams rushing offense. So I really trust McVay, I think, in this, and then just to put Goff in a good position, I think, for much of this game, to not have to make too many plays. And I think he might string together a high completion rate in this game, I think, due to that rushing offense. So I think this Rams offense will look pretty good in this game. Now I look at the other side of the ball, and I think the move to Tua, when I first saw it, I was kind of like, there's two ways you can look at this. I think option one was, Tua maybe looks phenomenal in practice, and they just decided they needed to make this change. But then we hear Fitz coming out and saying just blindsided kind of, and just kind of really hurt and all this stuff, which doesn't necessarily rule that out. But that makes me sounds to me more like option 2, that this was kind of pre-planned post-bye to kind of maybe be not necessarily a rebuild, but sort of. This is a team, as we mentioned, they're playing well, and they still definitely could be playing for the playoffs. So I think making this move maybe in this situation is kind of odd. And then I think also throwing Xavier Howard on the trading block, I think that also says something maybe just about Tua and Tua coming in, that it's maybe not as likely that he's looked great in practice that they're making this change. Although it can be a mix of both, I definitely lean towards, and I think it is probably just kind of pre-planned that this is when he was going to come in and play. And in that, then I would rather roll the die that, he's not going to look that great in his first start. But
I think logically, it's a 99.9% chance that it's pre-planned. There's nothing. There's nothing that we've seen from Fitzpatrick. We've seen Fitzpatrick play poorly in the past, but there's nothing. He hasn't even had really one of those miserably bad games this year. In fact, he's put in workman-like performances. I think he's capitalized on the weapons that he has at his disposal, and won games for them. They're 3-3 and competitive for winning the division right now. especially as we talked about with a lot of the cracks that we're seeing in the Bills and Patriots. Now is the time to strike. Now is the time to, move forward and to take advantage of the weakness in some of your competition. And instead, it looks like they're laying their sword down. And I think it's no coincidence that you're going into the bye week and make this decision before, at the end of the Jets game and going into the bye. I think it has absolutely cannot do anything to do with how good Tua looks in practice. I feel like, that has nothing to do with it. And I think to your point, the Xavier Howard news kind of in further suggests that there's some bizarre kind of disappointment that they're 3-3 right now. And like, oh man, I thought we were going to be like 1-5 by now. And, because this looks so suspicious, and I'm sure if Tua has a good first game, it's going to be like, oh man, they knew exactly what they were doing. And I think that's going to be very short-sighted. Super bizarre, but yeah, we can move on.
Next game, we're looking at the New Orleans Saints versus the Chicago Bears. Saints -4.
Saints have played the Bears tough pretty much every time they've played them for the last half dozen years. I think pretty much ever since the Bears beat the Saints in the championship game in like 2000 something. So maybe a decade and a half. I'll lean Saints here. I mean, again, I'm a Bears fan, so it's always very difficult for me to accurately price the Bears because I'm always just a super big Bears pessimist. I've been a Bears fan my whole life, and they're pretty much bad for the majority of my life. Super just nonstop 4-12, 5-11, 6-10 years, year in and year out. Never have a good quarterback. And that still is the case. So hard for me to price, but I would say I definitely lean the Saints here. Don't like the -4, of course. Would be nice to get that lower. But I think this is a game that the Saints likely win and possibly win convincingly. I think for a team like the Bears that is 5-2, there's a lot of turmoil in this organization and in the headlines and around Coach Nagy and his play calling and decision making and the flip flop from Mitch to Foles and not extending Allen Robinson and all of that. So a lot of drama around a 5-2 team that should probably be pretty excited. And I think the Saints are just calmly rolling along, struggling with the injuries, but continuing to put in, decent performances. Showed a little bit of cracks here and there, but they kind of bounced back. So I think this is a good spot for them to win this game. Obviously got to monitor Michael Thomas. I think he's going to be out again this week. And I know some of the replacement wide receivers that they were using also got banged up in the most previous games. So that's also still probably worth monitoring. But at least early on in the week, I'm leaning Saints for now.
Yeah, I don't really have a lean in this game, to be honest. I think about struggled on both the pass and the run this season offensively, and the Saints are pretty good against both defensively. So I don't really know how much success the Bears will have, but I do think this 4 is a little bit inflated, maybe due to that. So I kind of make the number probably where it is. So it's definitely a game I'm going to dig into more.
Mm-hmm.
Next game, we're looking at the San Francisco 49ers at the Seattle Seahawks. Seahawks -3.
So this is one I would say, at least as of now, I would say I probably like the most. So I'd probably bet Seahawks here, -3 at home versus the Niners. I think the Niners were able to put in 2. So I have the Niners power ranked pretty high. So I think I had them like 2 points higher than, you, Zach, and some of our other partners. So I've been high on them. Even in spite of some of the injuries, noting that they're super well coached. Again, we were pounding the table on the Niners 2 weeks ago at home, plus 3.5 versus the Rams. Easy winner, very decisive victory. Missed on them last week, and I think that was more a consequence of just how poor and disorganized the Patriots are right now. But the Niners are still struggling with injuries, especially in the running game. I know Trent Williams also got banged up, so I'll want to see what's monitoring his injury status. I think this is a pretty good bounce back spot for the Seahawks, and they continue to have defensive woes. So I think the Niners probably will be able to capitalize on that. There's a lot of people suspicious about how good the Seahawks actually are. But I think this is a game that the Seahawks will win and will win. And the thing is it's hard to bet the Seahawks by any amount of margin. I think that's the only thing that would probably make me a little bit concerned. Is it's like, if it's not Seahawks pick, it's going to come down to the final play and you're going to be sweating, and I have no conviction that the Niners are going to blow out the Niners. I don't think the Seahawks can really blow out anybody anymore this season, especially how bad their defense has gotten, especially with injuries and not being able to get any pressure whatsoever. So we'll see, Jamal Adams coming back at least. That could probably be at least a minor upgrade. I guess that's kind of my thoughts. I feel like I talked myself off of the Seahawks -3 being my favorite bet actually by the end there.
Yeah, I think Seattle is a team we've seen in 5 of their 6 games this year. They've played it within 1 score of the spread. So they like to play all their games pretty close to what is expected. I look at this game, the Niners are on a back-to-back road trip, and then also they just lost Samuel. So I think that's going to hurt them passing wise. And I think where San Fran's strength is obviously is their rushing offense. And that's actually where Seattle's defense is actually decent. They rank actually in the top 10 as a rushing defense. It's where their passing D is really bad and bottom 3 in the league. So I think in that, this is not a terrible matchup for Seattle defensively. And then I think to your point, not catching any points with Seattle, that does worry me, but I think they maybe got a wake-up call with that last week. I think they had several spots maybe in the fourth quarter where they played actually pretty conservative, and they definitely they ran to kind of kill the timeouts on the Cardinals. And I know a lot of times maybe the book will say to do that, but I think with certain teams and certain scenarios like Russell Wilson at quarterback, I think there's just more opportunity to put that game away on a 3rd and 2, not just to necessarily run the ball. And I just think that Seattle will maybe play a little bit more aggressive late in games, just learning from this, and because they definitely let that game slip away. And I definitely think, as you're saying, this is a great bounce back spot for that. So I lean towards Seattle as well in this game.
Yeah, I think it's a good buy low on the Seahawks, sell high on the Niners. The thing is I wish this line reflected that a little bit more so than maybe it is. I wish that the price was a little bit lower, but 3, it's not terrible. And yeah, if you can depend on Carroll and co adjusting the offensive game plan from some of those mistakes that they made versus the Cardinals, then I would definitely love the Seahawks -3. The thing is, we don't know that. And I think Coach Carroll and co have been quite stubborn, in fact, when it comes to their coaching philosophy over the several years. And that's why I think we were all kind of so surprised by the level of aggressiveness from the Seahawks over the first half of the season. And then, hey, maybe they flirted a little bit with in the Cardinals game. All right, let's go back to and prove that, our original approach could also work. And then it backfires. And all right, now we need to go. I guess that didn't work. So if we can depend on that happening, then I think I have even more conviction in the Seahawks, but we don't know that. And maybe we'll learn that in this game if the Seahawks revert back to that philosophy of what we've seen over the course of 2020. Then I think, definitely Seahawks bet on.
So one game I want to touch on really quickly, the line's not up, is the Dallas Cowboys at the Philadelphia Eagles. I saw in a really far offshore book that it was -7. Not sure if that's where it'll come out on a lot of the books. Have you seen a line in this game yet, Brett?
No, but I also heard from some of the podcasts I listened to that they were implying that it was going to be 7.5 if that 3rd string quarterback for the Cowboys is suspected to be playing.
Yeah, so I think the one thing I just really quickly wanted to touch on is I think this maybe plays out a lot to the likes of the Washington-Dallas game. Where's Philly's strength? It's their D-line. Their D-line ranks third versus the rush and fourth versus the pass. They're also third in sacks and fourth in adjusted sack rate. And Dallas has allowed the seventh most sacks this season. And now I think that number is actually deceiving because, if we look at the last two games where Dalton and then what's his name? Is it DiNucci? Whatever his name.
DiNucci.
Yeah, they've allowed 9 sacks in those 2 games, though, and so I think with that being said, those quarterbacks just aren't mobile, and I think with a poor offensive line that's allowing sacks, I think that's where Philly's strength is. So I think it's just a spot where it just doesn't line up for Dallas to really move the ball too well. The only thing that worries me about that -7, I guess, I'll lean to Philly, but Philly's also has been very dysfunctional themselves this year. But I mean, if there's a team like Washington that can go out and blow Dallas out 25-2, you can't just totally paste it over to this game. But I definitely think on a matchup standpoint, this still screams Philadelphia.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the 7.5 is going to try and scare you off. If that is the case, try to encourage bettors to find safety in the hook to bet the Cowboys. I think hopefully some people will continue to pound Cowboys just for name recognition in itself. The thing is, there's a lot of also Eagles support out there as well. Eagles, to your point, have also played poorly this year, to say it the least, and also are completely banged up. I think really the only way the Eagles couldn't cover 7.5 is because of the Eagles shooting themselves in the foot. Wentz gets pressure, fumbles, Cowboys pick it up, and this is like a relatively low scoring game, and the Eagles win it 17-10, 13-6, in a really, really ugly game. The thing is, obviously the Cowboys defense is getting healthier. So there's that. So yeah, I definitely have to lean Eagles here. 7.5 probably should be higher. It probably should be 9.5. We'll have to see where this line pops up.
Right. Next game, we're looking at the Los Angeles Chargers at the Denver Broncos. Chargers by 3, moving to 3.5.
I got to rewatch the Chargers-Jags game. I don't know how to feel about this one. Division game on the road. Of course, that's going to be the standard handicap on this, and I think there's going to probably be, especially if it gets to 3.5, a lot of numbers guys that are just going to bet the Broncos blindly. So I don't believe this should probably get too much higher than 3.5. That being the case, I imagine the market's got to be pretty high on the Chargers right now. So hard to bet on them since the price is probably overvalued, but it doesn't seem to be, at least from an extreme perspective. It's not like it's Chargers 4.5 or 5 on the road. Probably ever so slightly lean Chargers, but I do not feel comfortable about saying that.
Yeah, I don't have much of a lean in this game. I know it opened up, I think, around 1 after the Chargers played on Sunday, and then it quickly got bet up to 2.5. Then it was 3, and now it's almost 3.5. So we've only seen money, I think, on the Chargers so far, and I assume a lot of it's been sharp money. But I think to your point, too, we're definitely going to see some buyback on Denver at the 3.5 number. Denver's defense, actually, despite having the injuries that they've had, they've actually performed very well this year. I know they're top 10 in defensive performance. So I think this is a game that they can maybe muddy up a little bit. And I mean, we know it's always tough to play in Denver. Just in general, it's a divisional game. So I'm not sold on taking the Chargers here by 3. So yeah, it's a game where I don't have a strong lean on this point.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Next game, we're looking at the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Baltimore Ravens. Ravens by 3.5.
And one thing I'm really realizing is there's a lot of games this week. Seems like more than, not a lot of COVID issues popping up so far this week. So we're getting a lot of lines to talk about. I think last week and the week prior, there was 3-4 games off the board still pending COVID results and things of that sort. So taking a bit to get through this. I'm going to lean Steelers here. I think they have the right type of defense. I think, Zach's talked a lot about this, that he thinks the Steelers are basically designed in the exact right ways to beat the Ravens, not just on a micro individual game perspective, but over the course of the season and to win the division. So I'm probably going to lean Steelers here, especially if you're kind of getting that hook. I haven't seen anything to really love about the Ravens this year. I think there's question marks around Lamar Jackson and the accuracy of his arm, something that we talked about a lot last year. And I think we just, again, hit the running game and a lot of other factors all came into play that allowed him to really capitalize and look misleadingly explosive from a passing perspective, when I feel like that really wasn't the case. And I think it's starting to demonstrate itself this year. Coming off a bye, obviously a team very well coached at home in division. So gonna be a tough game, gonna be exciting to watch, but still probably lean Steelers with the hook.
Yeah, I don't have strong conviction in this game so far. I saw the look ahead on this line. I think it even opened up this after the Steelers played on Sunday, was Ravens by 5.5, and it quickly came down. So I wonder if that was just an overreaction to Pittsburgh beating Tennessee, or if it was more so just a bad line. I kind of think that it was more so a bad line, but we'll see. We have two average offenses this year. As we've said, the Ravens aren't performing too great. And the Steelers aren't explosive offensively either, but we have two top 3 defenses. So I think in that, that both teams kind of will maybe slow each other up a little bit more than normal. I think Pitt's defensive line is where they're really strong. So I think that's going to be big and an advantage for Pittsburgh, because Baltimore's offensive line ranks 23rd for the run and 22nd for the pass. So they're not performing too well on the offensive line, and that's really where Pitt exceeds. So I think that's just one thing that plays in Pitt's favor. But then I look at what plays in Baltimore's favor, and as you mentioned, Harbaugh off a bye, he's actually 10-2 straight up and 9-3 against the spread. And I know just from the last couple of years, just kind of realizing spots, maybe even week 1, I know the Ravens have typically performed pretty well. Just extra rest, extra time. Harbaugh has been a very good coach. So it's a spot where I'm hesitant to kind of go against, just remembering last year versus the Patriots, for example, or week 1 versus the Dolphins. So I think they're a team that generally plays pretty well when they have that extra prep time. I do worry because the number's a little bit short, or just a lower number. And Baltimore's a team that normally, when we're talking about against the spread numbers, they're a team that they'll cover more times than not when the spread's maybe -10, -11, because they play that bully type of football. And then the last thing I'll just mention on this game is I think the loss of Devin Bush for the Steelers will play a much larger role than maybe we saw versus the Titans, or I guess that was really the first game without him. But I think compared to other games without him, because I think he would have been a key piece to kind of help slow down Lamar Jackson running the ball. Devin Bush is a very good player sideline to sideline. So that's one concern I have. That defense is still very capable and still a top 5 defense when it comes to probably stopping Lamar in the league. But I definitely think Devin Bush would have been a big positive for this team. So I think, honestly, at 3.5, I don't have a strong lean at all. But I think if this gets to 3, I think I'll lean towards Baltimore, to be honest.
Yeah. This is one of those games I want to see where the public's leaning by Thursday, Friday, and if there's a particular side that they're taking with any sort of conviction. Now, maybe it's split and there is really no kind of signal there. But if there is, that's when I'll probably, will give me more conviction to fade and move into the other direction. I probably won't bet Ravens here. You make a really good point with, the absence of Bush, really losing kind of a speed factor there. It would be a really critical component versus a team like the Ravens. I think the Steelers defense is definitely a little bit overrated. They get good pressure, no doubt about it, but they can be exposed, and you can put 30 on them. And so the Ravens definitely can. Thing is, the Ravens definitely could come out and look explosive in this game. The thing is, I haven't seen like the sort of explosiveness from them this year as we saw last year, really in any game so far. And again, maybe there is a component that they're somewhat sandbagging the way maybe Casey is. So there is that possibility. It didn't show up in the KC game, so that is a little bit worrisome. Unless they're playing some real kind of 4D chess here and know that they're probably going to face the Chiefs maybe later on down the line, aren't too concerned about the home field factor, and really didn't want to reveal anything in a regular season game. I don't know, maybe that's a little bit too much of a stretch. Because I've seen in multiple games, Lamar Jackson just look off, missing touch passes, open passes towards the sidelines, whiffing badly on deep passes. And that's certainly not by design. Maybe he is hurt. Maybe he is gimpy. And maybe the bye week will help him get a lot fresher. Maybe he's been dealing with something, and maybe that's been playing into it. I think Lamar Jackson truthers certainly are hoping so. I think we'll learn a little bit more so in this game.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I'll say in this game, I think that whoever wins the turnover battle is going to, win this game, whatever you want to say. And I know that generally can be said for most games, but I think this game even more true than others. But we'll see how that goes.
Definitely.
Last game we're looking at Monday night, we got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the New York Giants, Bucks by 11.
So is Antonio Brown going to be able to play in this game, or is that after this week? I think it's after this week.
It is after this week, week 9.
Yeah. I like Sterling Shepard being back with the Giants, giving him a nice 10 days prep for this game. Bucks coming off, shorter week vis-a-vis the Giants, and having to travel back across the country and then traveling back up north to New York. So not a great travel agenda there for the Bucks. Bucks are rolling. It's hard to see the Giants playing competitively, and that's what this price is saying. But we see these weird games where, teams just kind of lay a bit of a dud. Maybe this is that one with the Bucks. I know you were talking about Chris Godwin's going to be out for this game. That has always kind of disrupted the offense a bit, throwing it a little bit out of rhythm. I think the Giants' defense is somewhat underrated. I think the Giants can hang with an 11, especially if this is a game where the Bucks aren't going to try to really crush the Giants. Now, it is a primetime game, so there's still going to be somewhat of a focus. This isn't kind of just going to be a snoozer kind of noon game. I think it really is going to come down to, is Danny Dimes going to turn the ball over twice and one lead directly to a Buccaneers score? That would be my biggest concern with this. I think if you told me Danny Dimes does not turn the ball over in this game, then I'll bet the Jets plus 11 or the Giants plus 11. I think that's going to be one of the key variables in this.
Yeah, I think you'll like my comparison for this game. Steelers at the Giants week 1. I think in that game, we saw a very strong defense, and the Giants definitely would have covered that game if Daniel Jones didn't turn it over. I know he turned it over, I think, 10, 15-yard line late in that game to maybe make it a 3-point game.
Yep.
But yeah, we're looking at this. Giants have extra rest. It's just a very poor offense this year, though. Third worst in the league. And then we're going against the Buccaneers, which have been the best defense so far this year, and I expect them honestly to finish maybe as a top 1 or 2 defense on the season. So I don't think they're overperforming at this point. I think you make a really strong point about Godwin being out and kind of disrupting the flow. We definitely saw that versus the Bears for the Buccaneers this season. So I think that's something a little bit of a worry. So that 11 does seem a little steep, but I do have some concerns to step in front of Tampa Bay. I think in general, this team, they're actually second in the league for against the spread margin on average. They're covering by an average of 8 points per week through the first 7 weeks. So that's good for second best in the league. So that's a team where sometimes the market just doesn't catch up to quite as quickly as they should. And I know Zach is really big on the Bucs, and he's kind of mentioned that they're a team that they keep overperforming, but they keep being underrated by the market just in pricing. So it's a team where we might want to look at the Buccaneers, and it's hard to step in front of them. Last thing I'll say, there's a trend that I've came across, and Daniel Jones is actually 0-7 against the spread as a home underdog. Don't know if there's too much that can be said. And then I don't love trends where there's only 7-game sample, but when it starts with the 0, it's always something to maybe just keep back of your mind.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that, all great points. And I think that, we've kind of agreed even in the preseason podcasts that the Bucs is going to be one of those teams that you would naturally continue to upgrade in their power rankings as the season matures. And so I think that's perfectly playing out right now. I think that this is I know there's no Saquon Barkley, but this is somewhat of the healthiest that the Giants offense has been, with Sterling Shepard, Ingram, Golden Tate, now having weapons down the field. And I think, the addition of Sterling Shepard back is pretty meaningful. And they're capable. We saw the Giants last year. They were able to put up points. They had Barkley, but, even when Barkley missed, they were still able to put up points. And so I'm really confused as to what's wrong with the offense this year. It could be Jason Garrett in his coaching philosophy that's completely full of holes. This is, it might be a misleadingly attractive amount of points, but I probably, and under no circumstance, am going to be betting the Bucs -11 in this situation, though.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think the 11 could be deceiving. Like, what's the difference really between 11 and 8 maybe in this game? So at 8, you definitely probably wouldn't be considering the Giants. So that's one way to look at it. I kind of agree. This is a game where I probably won't have a strong lean either way.
Right, exactly. All right, good stuff. Definitely went a little bit long this time around, but there's a lot of stuff that we wanted to dive in and extract over the course of week 7, illuminate some of our feelings and thoughts around some of these games and some of these teams and the directions that they're heading. And then definitely wanted to share our thoughts and initial leans and perspectives on all of the week 8 games as we head an inch closer to the next Sunday. So thanks everyone for listening to this edition of the Sports Trading Desk. Be sure to catch out our weekly articles, Corey's ATS Confidence report, the X-ray report, and Zach's Blitz report. Zach should be coming and recovering from COVID and coming back from Germany in the next week or so. So you should hear him on the podcast soon, hear some of his thoughts. So you can look forward to that. Again, thanks everyone for listening. And that's the closing bell.